Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music. And this video is going to be about a really interesting psychedelic band, and actually a truly psychedelic band. I think that term gets thrown around a lot, and it's not always appropriate. I think psychedelic records are actually mostly around 67, 66, 67, 68, some in 1969, and they have a certain quality to them. Certainly some pop elements, usually a lot of weird sound effects and cool fuzz guitar and just the kind of stuff that stoners like to listen to. By the way, I think people should start lighting up some reefer when they watch my videos and check out these albums. It couldn't hurt. But Kangaroo, really cool band from 1967 to 1968 to 1969. Definitely qualify as a psychedelic group, and I'll get into more of the reasons why in a moment. But the band is a really interesting lineup. Barbara Keith, uh, who on vocals, she was a village folk singer, had a couple solo albums out on Verve, and then I think her third one was on Warner Brothers slash Reprise. And she never got a lot of traction, but she's a good singer. Sometimes kind of reminds me of Melanie a little bit. But then the drummers, Andy Smart, who used to be a member of the Remains and a group called Bo Grumpus that had one album on Atco, and then of course he was one of the founding members of Mountain, so he's on the Leslie West solo first Mountain album before he got replaced by Corky Lang, and then John Hall, a multi-instrumentalist, guitar, bass, and vocals, who later went on to form Orleans, so he had quite a bit of success. And then the real star of this record is Ted Speliers, sometimes spelled Spelios, a 16-year-old guitar player. He joined this band Kangaroo in 1967-68 at 16 years old, and at the time they were a trio. So I would assume that probably Barbara Keith hadn't joined at that point, and that they were more of a guitar, bass, drums trio. And so they formed in Boston, and then they moved to Washington D.C. and they got signed to MGM Records and put out I Never Tell Me Twice. It was released as a single, and then the album came out. It just has a picture of the band on the cover, as you can see from the thumbnail. And then their second 45 was kind of a goof song on this album called Frog Giggin', and there's a little monologue before the song talking about the connection between frogs and going out and have teenage sex. And then it's kind of a novelty tune in a way, but it does have some really nice guitar work from Ted Speliers, and so it's still worthwhile. It fits in the album really nice. But I'm going to go through the songs because there's so much interesting variety and talk about their weaknesses and strengths, and mostly strengths. I think one weakness is that in total they're kind of a regular 60s psychedelic band. They have the male female vocals combined and write those kind of songs, although there are some interesting complexities in some of the arrangements and whatnot, particularly the guitar parts make this record a lot more complicated than it otherwise would be. So it starts out with Such a Long Time, which has some really cool wah-wah guitar, and the guitar parts are really interesting and right up front. And then you get into the second, third, and fourth songs, which are all just killer. Trying to be a woman is a totally great psych song with a great chorus, really awesome guitar work. The third song is Daydream Stallion, which has Barbara Keith on solo vocal, which adds some nice variety to the record, and then some just killer guitar work. It's really interesting when you get, particularly in the second half of the song, where the guitar work really kicks in, and really nice to hear Barbara Keith in that kind of setting. Then the fourth really great song is Make Some Room in My Life, with some really cool, very psychedelic guitar parts. Guitar work is just excellent, and there's parts in it that sound like he's playing backwards or is using a backwards effect, and I was really surprised to read that he managed that effect just by the way he played it. And of course, Hendrix used backwards guitar effects, but that was when you actually would take a tape solo and then just run the tape backwards. But this guy Ted Speliers managed to achieve this effect just by the way he played, apparently through a Fender Broadcaster. And so then when you get into the next songs, number 5, of course, is Frog Giggin', which I talked about earlier. 6 is You Can't Do This. You you can't do this time. Oh, you can't do this to me. And then song 7 is If You've Got Some Love in Mind. And those are pretty straightforward 60s psychedelic pop tunes. But once again, marked by some really interesting guitar work, even when the guitar work's not right up front like it is on most of the record. You can hear him doing some really interesting things that are just buried in the mix a little bit more. And so then we get into I Never Tell Me Twice, which was the single off the album, and it's acoustic based and just wonderful, really cool singing, scat singing from Barbara Keith, and almost an instrumental number, which is interesting that it released it as a single, but acoustic guitar and then vibes, and then Barbara Keith doing the scat singing. So a really nice addition to the record. Then you get in song 9, Tweed's Chicken Inn. Once again, really killer guitar tone, totally killer psych song with a really nice chorus and just enough complexity so that it's a little more interesting than a lot of psych records in a way, and a really killer solo. And Ted Speliers is quite a legend, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in a separate video because it was really interesting doing this video on Kangaroo and then the video on Holy Moses that both feature Ted Speliers, and he has quite a legend surrounding him, and I want to get into that some more. And it's definitely justified listening to this album. So then you get into the last 3 songs, Happy Man, The Only Thing I Had, and then finishing up with Maybe Tomorrow. And Happy Man is kind of a novelty tune, kind of like a skiffle song, but it has some really cool slide work, so it's really interesting to hear Speliers doing some nice slide work too. And then you finish up the album with Maybe Tomorrow that has Barbara Keith um, doing some nice harmony vocals and just a nice ride out of the album. The last 2 songs are both really cool to ride out the album, which has a really great psych feel with a lot of great guitar work, and then it finishes up with Barbara Keith and then some violin and some vibes and a lot of violin work on it. Fairly primitive, but just nice surprise to this record. So they were definitely testing the limits of what they could do in their format. There seems to be a nice level of imagination, creativity, and taking some chances. And there's a nice variety on the record. As I brought up in video after video, a lot of these bands, that are around from 68, 69, and 70, they have one foot in 60s rock and psychedelia, and then some modern moves looking more forward to what we would get in the 70s, and then have a lot of variety because they have different songwriters in the band, and they all want to express their own voices within the group. And this record really works well with that kind of format. Definitely some mixed personalities, different variety of approaches in the record. But one thing that's nice is it's all really united by Ted Speliers' excellent guitar work. And so that's the thing that really makes this record extra special in the end. Just the imagination and technique and different effects and approaches. The bends are really cool. The chord structures are really cool. Ted Speliers is definitely a really cool guitar player, and for a record from 1968, his guitar work is pretty forward-looking and very promising, and really makes this record extra special. And it was just a joy to listen to for me, just to listen to all the really cool ideas he has about guitar parts in these records. So a lot of surprises. I mentioned that a lot of times about the choices that a musician makes, and then getting these wonderful surprises. this record could be very predictable as a psychedelic record from 1968, and Ted Spelier really knocks it up a couple of notches with such imaginative and wonderful guitar work. So anyway, I'll post the link below to the Kangaroo record. Check it out. As I often say, it may not be for everybody, but if you're a psych fan and you like these American psych bands that kind of mix some folk elements and a little dash of novelty and a little dash of jazz, and then have really cool psychedelic guitar work, this one's a real humdinger. So check it out. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching.